Okay, hello and welcome everybody to Designing Your Evaluation Plan. This is the second of 3 presentations that we're doing in the series that are focusing on evaluation. The first one, Evaluation Basics, we've recorded and it's now available on YouTube. In this session, we're going to take that to the next step, which is about how do you go about setting up a plan. Okay, so let's get this straight. And people have challenged me on this, and I've been able to respond. There's no change that can't be measured one way or another. So if you've got a project, a program that's needing to change, and that is the key, not something you do all the time, although you can do that, but what difference has it made to the lives, to the marketplace, or to whatever parameters you put in place? So how do you plan to measure how successful your project has been? Has it made the difference you expected? And where do you start? Well, a quick introduction to myself, Pat Gross, the community entrepreneur. Over 30 years experience in the space of funding, community development, marketing and events. I've worked on both sides of the government fence, of the funding fence, and I've done it not just here in Australia, but also over in Europe. And I've trained and mentored community organisations across Victoria and in southern New South Wales on how to evaluate community projects. So here's what I've done, just as an example. Between 2010 and 2013, I was part of a small team. What happened there? I was part of a small team that was contracted through a government program to train community partnerships. So it wasn't just a community organization, it was groups of community organizations in a program from 2010 to 2013. And in that, there were 4 of us, and we went around Victoria, and we were mentoring these partnerships on how to go through the whole of the evaluation process to measure the change. And I've also evaluated projects in diverse areas, such as in aged care, in e-learning, in energy efficiency, multiculturalism, and the one that's sampled there is Taking Learning to the Learners, which was about parents returning to work. The measuring impact that you can see at the back was a framework that we used for that 3-year program. And I'm going to refer to that in this presentation. So let's have a look at evaluation frameworks and evidence collection tools. If you've got any questions, put them in the chat space and we can work through them afterwards. Okay, this is a reminder. This was used last time. What is project evaluation? And I really sort of refer to the International Labour Organization, who said it is a systematic and objective assessment of an ongoing or completed project. The 2 key words there are systematic and objective. In other words, how you plan over a period of time, it has to be planned as opposed to ad hoc. It has to be a system. So if you're going to be asking questions at the beginning, you'll be asking the questions during, and you'll be asking the same questions at the end, so that there's a consistency. It's also objective in that you can't actually be emotionally involved in the process yourself. So if you're too close to the project, you might be the program manager, coordinator, etc. You're probably not the best person to do the evaluation. I know that because I've evaluated for clients, and some of their learnings were perhaps not what they wanted to hear, but they were true, honest, and objective. So the aim is to determine the relevance and level of achievement of your objectives, of the development, effectiveness, efficiency, impact, and sustainability. Lovely words, but what do they mean? We'll go into this as we go through. Okay, so change. I mentioned that when you're measuring something, there has to be a beginning, a middle, and an end. That's the definition of a project. But there has to be some level of change. Otherwise, why would you be doing this in the first place? What difference are you making to lives? What difference are you making to situations? So what could change look like? Well, it could be the impact. Now, this is the ripple effect of what you do. So a good example that we used when we used to do the training program was somebody was run over by a vehicle. They ended up in hospital. The outcome was they were in hospital for 6 weeks. The impact of that had impact on their family, had impact on their job, had impact on their life, etc. That's just to sort of give you an idea of the ripple effect of the outcome. That is what's the impact. So you might be able to put somebody through training, and at the end of the training, the outcome is to get a job. But what's the impact of getting a job? And they might have been in the job for about 3-6 months. They end up getting a new place to stay. So that's an impact of that outcome. The relevance, the need, the target groups. Was it something that was needed? Efficacy, which is to produce a desired, intended result. Did you get the result you were looking for? Effectiveness of what you were doing. Efficiency, could this have been done any quicker? Did we have the right resources? Could the resources have been different? Can you imagine finding out the results of those kind of questions and then next time being able to apply what you've learned? It's all about a learning process. Sustainability, this is a good one, especially if it's a government funded project, for example. We tend to think about the project for the lifetime of what the funding is, but don't think about the lasting change and the continuity. So, these are sort of the aspects of change that we could be considering. Okay, so you want to think about doing an evaluation on a program that you're doing, or you may be required to do it because you've got funding. But the questions you'd be asking is, where do I start? Who does it? Remember, I mentioned there has to be a level of objectivity. You may be too close to it yourself. So you might need somebody to come in from the outside, whether it's outside the department or outside the organization. It's about knowing what to ask. It might be worthwhile if you could put yourselves on mute, by the way. Knowing what to ask. What kind of questions do you need to ask? What tools do you use to gather the information that you're looking for? And we'll come to that later. How do you measure the change and the impacts of the change? Now, never ever forget the strong value of stories. And if you're going out there and you're talking to people, you're going to get their stories. They're really powerful, and they actually could be very, very useful for the next step, which will be the next session we're doing, which is around using the evaluation to further your cause. But in the meantime, how do you filter the stories? How do you do that? There is a way, there is a process. And how do you write? How do you write and ask the questions? You might know what to ask, but then how do you get those questions over to somebody? Because it might be that this person, these people, not just person, may be illiterate. So you wouldn't be giving them a written survey. You would be giving them an interview process or a focus group. So you have to think about how to reach the people, experts or participants or observers, and looking at it from their point of view, where they're going to feel most comfortable to give you the information that you're looking for. Okay, so I'm going to review some of the key points from the last session, the one on evaluation basics. Here we're talking about some basic terminology. So when you're putting together and running a project or a program, you're going to be looking at objectives, as already been mentioned, but outcomes. What are the results and the impacts? which I've mentioned, the ripple effect. Outcomes is really, really strong starting point. And so we'll come to this, but if you actually have a brief or an application, if it's a funding requirement, that's why it's so important for your outcomes to align to the outcomes of whoever is sponsoring or funding you. Short, medium, and long-term outcomes. There could be immediate result of what you're doing, but then there might be, I give you the example of somebody who's been trained, the outcome is they get a job. That's the short-term outcome. The medium-term outcome is that they might then sort of, I don't know, move into a promotion. And the third outcome and the longer-term outcome is, and it might be then relating to why you've been funding in the first place, and it could be there's more sustainability in their lives. They're not going, again, you said they're not going back into, the terminology recidivism, which means they're not going back into their old habits, etc. So you got to consider, these are some terminology you need to be considering when you're putting together a plan. What are the short, medium, and long-term outcomes that you may or may not measure? When I'm saying may or may not, because long-term outcomes usually tend to fall outside with any third-party specific requirements. But for you and your organization and your program, you might still be able to measure that anyway. What are the assumptions that you're making, and what are the external? I'm sorry, I'm actually not doing my best today. I've actually been going on this slide. I do apologize. Outcomes, medium, long-term, and assumptions and external factors. This is not like me at all. All right, I'm going back to the basics. Is what's benchmarking, formative, and summative? What kind of information, or what do you need to know at the beginning of the project? What do you need to know during the project? And what do you need to know about the change at the end? And the kind of information that you can be collecting is qualitative or quantitative. In other words, their stories, or it can be the data. And then you're looking at individual organization partners, community-wide system changes. All right, I've gone through that one as well. It is all related. Okay, so where do you start? If you're going to put together a plan, where do you start? Well, first of all, you start with the outcomes of whoever has sponsored the activity. I'm using the word sponsored because it could be something within your own organization that you're making a major change. It could be a program, or it could be something that you've been funded. So always look to what those outcomes are that the funder wants, because that's what you're going to have to report back about. At the same time, you might have your own outcomes that you want to also measure. Although your outcomes may align to your sponsor, you may have some additional quirks of your own that you want to measure. So consider those as well, because at the end of the day, if you're being paid or you have to get a result, yes, you've got to account to that. But you also have to account to what's in it for us. When are we going to take this information afterwards? So therefore, if you've got your own sort of outcomes, just massage them into the bigger picture. From those, you want to be asking 3 to 5 questions that you want to ask about that project and the difference it's made. And then what you want to do is to put those questions against a framework. Now, I'm going to give you some examples. A couple of these were actually in the last presentation. I put them into context. So you might be just running a program and you want to know, how much did we do? How well did we do it? Is anyone better off? That's a very simple one. You might be running an internal program. The one that comes to mind for me is a client who was running a meals program. for seniors in their community that would bring them to one central location. So here, how much did we do? How many, it could be how many meals, what we did. Then what you want to find out, so were monthly meals correct? Was it weekly meals, etc.? So all of that. How well did we do it? That's the kind of information that you would get from, from your own records, your feedback from your own staff, your own volunteers, but you'd also get feedback from the people who benefited. So that would be a way to be able to find out how well you did it. And you could find out right at the beginning what their expectations were. That might just come for a meal, but you might give them, the food might be better than they expected, etc. And is anyone better off? I mean, and this is where they asked me the question, if they're having these meals and bringing these people for meals, how do you measure, is anyone better off? And again, through pre-planning, you would be saying, well, why are these people coming in the first place? And then you could get their opinions, their viewpoints, what they're currently doing or not doing. And then you'll be measuring as they're, coming to the meetings, coming to the meals. And then at the end of it, you could be at the end of a period, you could be having a more in-depth conversation with them. And it'd be amazing the kind of information that they're going to give you about the difference it's made to their own lives, their own self-worth, their own connection with others. A second framework, and I'm mentioning frameworks because if you're going to start to put together your own evaluation, you might first of all think, is there anything else out there already? So that was the results-based one. This is one where you're actually putting somebody through some kind of a social change. It might be, I've seen this through alcoholism, or this is about drugs treatment. This is about social change. And there again is, in this example, but you can use it for other areas. And in this one, you're talking about how do you find out where people are before they even think about. Now, I remember using something similar in energy efficiency, for example, and people weren't even thinking in those days about being more energy efficient. This is a few years ago now. So, what was their thinking? Well, in the pre-contemplation stage. When they started to contemplate it, because we started seeing adverts or going to a presentation or something about that. And, what was the difference in that contemplation stage? What was it that, that triggered the light bulb? And then they go on and they might start initiating some changes in there. In this case, it was in their community centres. It was preparation. It was all those things they went through to alert their own organisations and to think about how they could be more energy efficient. And then they went into the action and then into the maintenance stage, just making sure it's keeps going. Now, as you know, fashions come and go, and there was a blip in time when climate change wasn't the top of the agenda, although it's back there now, the energy efficiency. So there was a going backwards. So in this model, you can actually measure, it's expected that you might go backwards. This is human nature. So in this kind of model, you have to think about what kind of change are you looking at, progressive, and what kind of questions, or I'm using the word questions, or identification of change do you need to be able to measure at those various stages. So that's a good example when there's some change happening socially or in the health area. The one I've been using as my base is the one I mentioned, which was called Measuring Impact at the time. And here you were actually, the function, the purpose, the partnerships, etc., how you delivered what you wanted to do. For us, it was focused around the concept of lifelong learning. There might be another sort of systemic, something you can put in there. But the one thing I always say, no matter what evaluation framework you're going to be used, think about any of those, the social change as a result of your project, the cultural change. Now, culture can be organization culture, it can be multicultural, it can be arts culture. There is a cultural change that may, need to be mapped. There's environmental change and there's economic change. So people getting jobs is economic change. Improvements in behaviors is social change. But there might be elements of both. So if you're wanting ideas of when you're asking your questions, just think of those, social, cultural, environmental, and economic, because they're going to come in somewhere. All right, so how do you go about this? This is where we wanted to get to. Well, first is to, as I said, determine the key questions. Start from whoever sponsored you or your brief and look at what the objectives and the outcomes were. So those are where you're pinning your questions from. And then you develop a plan. Think of a template, and I'm going to send you, or to the people who attend today, will get a copy of a planning template, and it'll be asking the questions. What you need to know. That's the question you want to know from those questions. So if you want to know that result, then you need to know what you will measure, how you will measure, and when you will measure. Because if I remember saying, it's a systemic approach. So, and it maps to the next dot point there is a delivery plan. So if you've planned out this program, or you have an overarching plan with timelines, then build into those timelines opportunities to gather information. That is the key. It's this template about what you need to know, what you'll measure, how you'll measure, and where, and that's when you get to the when, and the when maps to your delivery. If you do that, you capture information. How many times have you come across a project that's been evaluated at the end, not at the beginning? It's gone backwards. And then you ask the question, oh, we could have captured this information. Why didn't we? The thing has been and gone. It could have been an awards evening, or it could have been a festival or something, and you wanted to get how people are reacting. You've got to plan it in the time of, the most opportune time to get the information and the evidence you're looking for. And who will measure each evaluation activity? Again, being objective, and how, who will be able to collect the information. You may have, I know a client who's got a series of volunteers who are trained to lead focus groups. They're trained to do surveys, and they're objective. So then the process then is to, as I said, look at the kind of questions you're going to be asking when, but be able to build in right at the beginning the kind of information that you're looking for. So it could be, I say data, it's where people are, it could be the demographic, it could be the market, it could be, put in some data, that's the quantitative. Perceptions, attitudes, and behaviors, that may be how people are feeling, what people are thinking, especially if it's going for social change, or there's going to be a monumental change. You need to know exactly where people are at the beginning of the process and what sort of conditions that you're operating in. So you'll be able to, if you capture that information, then you can go back and you can revisit that. And you can revisit, changes the way people are thinking as they're going through the program, or the program, whatever the program is, and then in the conditions. So benchmark it, formative, benchmark, formative, and summative. So what does it look like? Well, I've just sort of I've just put the plan I'm going to send you is going to be more detailed. But for this one, we had, our theme was about community learning. Indicator was changes to the way the partners manage their business. The measurement was perceptions, feedback from partners, changes to skill levels, changes to. And then their tools, we've got instruments, got tools. This has come from the publication, is what you're going to do, how you're going to do that. So you're going to do it from interviews, you're going to do it from third-party feedback, position descriptions, and review of documents. So they're just, I'm actually going to go and show you next some of the tools. I do have a document, probably about 20 odd different ways that you can gather evidence. So I'm going to start with surveys. Surveys are great for measuring change. And today you can even do them online. Now you've got to think about how you're going to get that information from people. We've done surveys in the street. And then when we've done surveys in the street, we've had to be mindful of the demographic and the time of day. So, during the week, you might have more older people coming from 3 p.m. or onwards. You may have, young mothers and children. At the weekend, where do you go? You might be going somewhere where there's, I don't know, a local football match or something like that. So, surveys is great, but you need to be consistent, and you also need to be mindful of the mix that you're going to be getting the result from. And that's through all, really. You have to be mindful of your demographic, and to be as fair as possible. The Likert scales, the smiley faces or the 1 to 5s, they're a good measure, especially when you have people who may be not more emotional, or probably don't have probably some literacy skills, shall we say. So sometimes they might be more responsive to, how do they feel, sort of not to 5 or smiley faces. Interviews are really good. And again, be consistent with the questions that you're asking. So you're asking everybody the same questions, because at the end of the day, you're comparing those answers. Also, you have ethics there to make sure that people are aware of how their information is going to be used, and you get your permissions no matter what you do. Focus groups. I remember doing some focus groups recently. And again, the mix of people that were attending, I held, was it 3 or 4 different focus groups, all on the same question, but we actually were targeting different demographics. And it was interesting to see, what was comparable across all of them, and what they say the mothers felt as opposed to the teenage youth, as opposed to the businesses, etc. So focus groups are really good ways, especially also if you've got a lot of information and you want to take it to the next level. Then you might take the information you get from the top level and create a focus group. Data, statistics, that's so important. If there's a way to measure that change, like number of people coming into your programs or activities, before, during, or as a consequence of what you're doing. Minutes of meetings, project documents, etc. Don't forget them. They are actually a tool for measuring change, because that will be recording and getting feedback from the powers that be, etc. Case studies. Case studies are great, and they're really useful for the next step, which is not just for the gathering the information, but how do you use the information as well. Storytelling, I mentioned to you that if you can get people's stories, and especially if you get them on a sort of like a consistent sort of basis. And what I mean there is there's a concept called most significant change, as an example. And you can get people to talk about their journey over the program or the activity, and at the end of it. And then what you do is you listen to all the stories, and you'll find there's some consistent similarities. So it's a little bit different to just catching odd case studies. If you encourage people to tell their stories and you gather enough of them, you'll see that there's a trend coming through. That's the most significant change. And then another one, which and I said these are just examples. Another one, which is I recommend people using, and this is a very basic example here, is what I call collaboration charts. And I call it, came from the concept that we were using. And that is, if you're wanting to increase your presence somewhere, and you can use it for different things. This is just about how you're making connections with collaboration, with collaborators. So for example, before the project started in this example, they had a strong relationship with the local school. They had a relationship with the library. Now you see the dotted line, and this was a health project. They only had to sort of, they knew about the gym, and people may have attended the gym, but they had no kind of formal relationship. And then there was a farmer's market, a local farmer's market, and there was no connection with it whatsoever. And after the project, and I usually say do this 3 times, before, during, and after. And then you can look at, okay, so how did we go afterwards? We still had a strong relationship with school, and in the reports you'll probably be saying what you were doing with the school. The relationship with the library was still there, but they'd made a formal connection with the gym, and then made whatever this project was for healthy options. Food was a really good one. So this is really good. I can immediately think of a funding line in Victoria that you would benefit from a project like this. Especially young people and healthy eating. So that's an example. And just before COVID hit, I was working on a project with a group of neighbourhood houses in Melbourne. And I remember one of they did this evaluation, this collaboration chart as part of the evaluation. And what they did at the beginning looked okay, but one of them at the end and showed the changes she'd made and the connections she'd made was absolutely, it could just blew you out of the water. And it actually showed that this particular neighbourhood house had actually grown in confidence in actually approaching organisations that they initially thought were competitors. But as it turned out, they were potential partners in the community. So this was just by introducing this collaboration charts concept. We did other things as well. During the project, we actually brought representatives of some of these agencies to speak to the group about what they did. So we made that initial connection. And by making that initial connection, that's when they were able to then exchange ideas. And this is where they move forward. So as I said, I will send a copy of the tools, and I will send a framework going back to those questions. So we've covered the evaluation frameworks and evidence collection tools. Okay, so where do you start? You start with the outcomes. Who does it? Work out somebody who's not too close to it. The questions you ask, thinking about the frameworks that you may be asking, or ask questions at the beginning, make sure that you're consistent however you ask those questions. The right tools. There's a lot of tools that you can choose from. How you measure change at the beginning, in the middle, and the end to filter stories. Gather a number of them all on the same theme and work out the common trends. And then how to write and ask questions in terms of being mindful of who you're approaching, their demographic, the time of day, whether their literacy skills levels, etc., just to consider those. Okay, just quickly, we're still planning on putting together a workshop on measuring your community impacts, a full day face-to-face near you, and we're taking expressions of interest, and we're also looking for engaging locations. So if this is something that you think will be well received in your community, then, and this will be more practical and you will be able to do some exercises, then we're really, really interested to hear. And as I mentioned, next time, we will be taking this to the next level, which is your reporting, but also how you take the evidence you've collected and use it for your own benefits as well. Thank you.